This is the setup and modes of the EKEN H9R, a little inexpensive action camera. I actually really like it. To turn the camera on, it has this symbol in the front for power on and off, so we'll go ahead and take advantage of that. I'm just going to hold it down for a second. And the camera turns on. Alright, right now it came up in a video mode. It's telling me that it's in a 1080p 30 frames per second. I know that because it's got a little video camera here, and it's showing me the 1080p at 30 frames per second. It's also showing me the amount of time I have left on this video card over here. Alright, so by pushing the front power on button repeatedly, we can cycle through what we have. And see how I'm just doing that? And we'll get out of that setup menu and back to where we started. Alright, that's 1080p, 30 frames per second, and that's the mode that I've been playing with this little action camera at. It's also one of the resolutions and frame rates that I use for YouTube videos. Anyway, the next mode is the 12 megapixel wide format, and it's telling me that I'm on picture 1 out of 909 or 9,999. Next comes this little symbol right here that has multiple pictures up in here, and you can see I'm still in that 12 megapixel wide. Unlike other action cameras on the market, it doesn't let you change out of the view that it has. It has a very wide angle view of about 170 degrees. However, using it on a dash cam and things like that, it's a very usable wide angle effect. Anyway, right now we're in the burst mode, which in this camera is 3 frames, just one right after the other. Next symbol is this camera with the timepiece behind it, and this does time lapse and it does continuous lapse. It allows you to set the time between exposures and time lapse. Again, if you've never done any time lapse photography, you want to make sure that your shutter time, that the shutter's open, say 2 seconds, is less than your time between frames. In other words, typically if you're trying to capture cars moving or something in a time lapse, you want a fairly quick frame rate, say 5 seconds between frames, but you want to make sure that the shutter time is below that time interval. So otherwise you get some really unpredictable results. And then if you're doing clouds or things where there's a longer time between intervals, it's generally not a problem. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue to cycle through. And after time lapse we get to settings. And so let's go ahead and enter settings. And notice that I hit the button here on top to get into the settings mode, and that brought up our video resolution. Alright, I've already told you that I default here to 1080p 30 frames a second, but one of the reasons why I bought this camera is the native 4K capability. Some of the other variants of this camera didn't really have 4K. They upsampled the video. This actually has native 4K, and so let's go ahead and see what our options are. To enter this menu, we'll go ahead and hit the top button again, and here are your settings that you have. We have 1080p at 60 frames per second. In a project that can give us a quasi slow motion effect with that higher frame rate. Scrolling down using these buttons, or sorry, these arrow buttons on the side of the camera, we can go to our 4K 25 frames per second. And almost all my projects I work at a final finished frame rate of 25 frames per second. That gives a very cinematic type look, and so it has great functionality for me, considering that I do work in 4K video, just to have a little action camera to be able to edit in the background. But anyway, I'm going to cycle back up and go ahead and accept the 1080 frames per second. I enter that mode, and now I get back into the next mode. Looping video is really handy for doing memes and other videos where you want the content to loop back and forth. Timestamp, I have it turned off, but you can timestamp like on a dash cam if you wanted to use it for that or something like that. Exposure, I'm going to go ahead and enter that mode. It's pretty simple on this camera. It's just an exposure compensation with stops of EV values. We can scroll down through it, and you see that we have quite a bit of a range that doesn't show when you initially look at the camera. So we really have a latitude in our exposure compensation. I'm going to go back and just set that at 0. Again, enter the value here, and then get back once you've entered the value into your next menu setup. Photo resolution, we'll go ahead and enter that value, again hitting that top button for each selection. We have a photo resolution of 4608 by 2592. That happens to be a little higher than a 4K frame capture. That's a 12 megapixel wide image, and as most of you know, 3840 is your standard 4K resolution. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it where it's at. Again, I enter that value by hitting the button on the top of the camera. Burst photo, I'm not going to actually go in there, but just you have a choice of off or 3 photos. Time lapse, I've already mentioned the time between exposures, so we'll enter that and I'll just show you what options are. You have these options here, and you can actually extend it all the way down to 60 seconds between frames. Say you wanted to do a period of time where there's a lot of weather moving in, a thunderstorm, lightning, whatever you want to do. You can capture a storm's movement or whatever, it's up to you. Right now though, I'm going to leave it at 5 seconds between frames. It's a good value for daytime time lapse. So again, enter that mode. A continuous lapse is an interesting mode. It's used for typically like night photography, where you want to capture a meteor shower or something like that, and you have your longer exposure times, typically 20 seconds per exposure. This basically takes a photo one right after the other. So let's go ahead and enter that and look at that mode, and basically it's on or off. Again, it just allows one exposure right after the other, and so it's off. We'll go ahead and get out of that, and we'll work our way down through. Power frequency, honestly, I don't know what that does. I left it on the 50 hertz that it came with. Let's go ahead and look at the options, and I figured it knew what it needed. If any of you want to comment on a better use of this, please let me know. I'm going to actually try to get hold of the manufacturer, and I will put this in a comment below this video. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it where it came. Language, obviously I'm speaking English. You have your normal languages. You have your date and time. Sound indicator, I want to mention that. You have the choices of beeps on and off, and again I suggest that, you know, I have them right now just because I'm using a still camera, or if I'm doing time lapse and I'm not doing any sound, it's fine for the beeps to be on, but you certainly have the ability to turn it off. You also have a volume control. I'm going to exit that. Alright, I'm kind of stuck in this mode, and this is a good exercise for me. Can I get out of it by just hitting that? Okay, that little trick in the interface there, I was stuck in that. I had to cycle the front button to get out of that, so that's a little inconsistency in the interface. Sometimes you'll run into that. This allows us to shoot upside down. That's kind of interesting if we have limited options to mount the camera. Also, it can be handy if you want to reverse footage, to have clouds actually moving the opposite way in a time lapse and things like that. So it does allow that. I don't want to use the screensaver. Power saver, I don't even know what's in all that. I don't want it shutting off on me, so I'm going to just leave it off. And then down here is our format. I'm actually going to format. And the last time I did this, it actually shut the camera down after it formatted the card. So let's go ahead and I'm scrolling down to yes and hitting enter. And see, it went through the shutdown of the camera after it formatted. So at least it's consistent. I'm going to I want to get back into the setup because I want to show you another little trick in the menus. So let's go ahead and we get there by scrolling through real quickly like we've done before. And then after time lapse, it brings up the setup menu. So we're going to go ahead and enter setup. And once you're here, you're kind of trapped. You see this X arrow? You can't get to it till you scroll all the way through. And then now you can hit this button up here. So you have to get that X to get out of that setup. Alright, so now the camera is set up 1080p, 30 frames per second. And that's a basic little way that the camera works. And I'm going to go ahead and shut it down. I hope this was clear and that you could see it. I actually was shooting with a backlit situation, and hopefully with the light very minimal, you can actually see what I'm photographing for you. Thank you.